the normal number of asthma exacerbations.
Heart disease, heart attacks, stroke.
Problems with kidneys, heart and lungs.
I've seen children die due to the air quality on our streets.
Vector-borne diseases as well as children's diseases.
And the worsening of psychiatric illnesses.
Stress and anxiety of not knowing, is this flood going to come again?
When the Category 4 typhoon made its landfall, the hospital's basement flooded.
Heat waves close to 50 degrees.
The unprecedented droughts and locust infestations.
More frequent, longer, and hotter heat waves are making my patients sicker.
I prescribe healthy air as a right for all children.
I prescribe the rich nations to make the biggest cuts in emissions.
To fund climate health adaptation projects.
To invest in reversal of the negative impacts.
To build resilience.
And tackle health and social inequalities.
And stop investing in fossil fuels.
Climate change is a health emergency, and it is my ethical duty to speak about it.
We have a crisis.
This is something to be concerned about, frankly. Dr. Eric Feigelding actually first flagged this for us back a couple of weeks ago when he was on the program, talking about how deer in Michigan were found to have COVID. And this is now Melody Schreiber writing over at theguardian.com. The headline, as COVID recedes in U.S., a new worry emerges, wildlife passing on the virus. This is pretty shocking stuff. First of all, you'll recall back in November of last year, they destroyed 17 million mink in Denmark. It was like one of the largest mink farms in the world, where they raise mink to kill them for their fur, and they got COVID, and it not only had COVID infected the mink, but then the mink. The COVID that was in the mink not only mutated, but it also infected a human being. Now, the mutation was not a particularly dangerous mutation, but, a human being got the virus from the mink. Well, now we're seeing around the world, SARS-CoV-2 has been reported in cats, in dogs, in ferrets, in minks, in lions, in tigers, in pumas, and in gorillas. And recently in the Denver Zoo, the hyenas tested positive. Now they're finding that 1/3 of the deer in Iowa who were sampled over a 9-month period had active infections, with a peak of 80% testing positive between November and January, the beginning of this year. This is not good stuff. The Melody Schreiber notes, nearly everything about their study shocked the scientists. They knew deer could be infected, but they were stunned by the numbers. 4 out of 5 deer tested positive at the highest peak, as well as high viral loads that were, quote, truly gobsmacking. This, should concern us all. My sense of it is that this pandemic has a long way to go, and that we're entering into what's going to be essentially a new era for humanity. Now, the big question is whether little kids growing up will get some kind of an immunity to the COVID virus from getting it when they're young and not, melting down. It doesn't look like this particular virus, this coronavirus, an infection with it doesn't look like it does produce long-lasting immunity, and that's kind of a scary thing.
They can blame it on climate change.
The ice caps were going to melt, they were going to be gone by now, but now they're setting records, okay?
A hearing on Capitol Hill on global warming was canceled because of snow in Washington, D.C. You can't make this stuff up.
It's a snowball, and that's just from outside here. So it's very, very cold out.
I found it ironic the president was wearing a trench coat. It was so cold, and he's talking about global warming.
It's not global warming. It's God's judgment coming to this country.
Environmentalism has become a radical movement, something we call the Green Dragon.
Scientists from the pits of hell, how dare you take from Yahweh the sovereign right over the weather?
When I was 6 or something like that, I opened up a birthday present that I didn't like, and the person that gave me the gift was there. And it just crushed that person, and you think, well, that's kind of how we're treating God when he's given us these gifts of abundant and inexpensive fuel sources. Right. God's buried those treasures there because he loves to see us find them.
We were put on this earth as creatures of God to have dominion over the earth for our benefit, not for the earth's benefit.
One hurricane is the equivalent of
10,000 nuclear weapons. So every year we've got like 2 million nuclear weapons going off, and the planet still seems to be in pretty good shape. So what is it we think we're going to do to damage the planet?
And we have more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere now, which is actually greening the planet.
It's greening the planet.
It's greening the planet.
That's good.
Yes, it is.
If you believe that mankind is causing climate change, you're deceived by Satan.
In the 60s, they could create, control, and steer or kill hurricanes. Of course, there's weather weapon stuff going on. We'd die without sunlight. We'd die. We'd be absolute zero in a matter of days. The sun is the complete driver. Everything else is in even a few percentage points in the different metric breakdowns. Not thermal energy. It doesn't even show up compared to that giant thermonuclear fireball. This polar bear desperately looks for a place to sleep in the night, but can't find it. These penguins are under the same assault. The most powerful land animal may also be the most powerful sea animal, swimming more than 300 miles to hunt whale. With one arm, it hauls in an over 1,000-pound beluga bull. Boom! Drags it in onto the ice. All I know is our Earth's being manipulated. This is hardcore, serious.
You know what's going to happen. You know, it's going to be COP this November, and in 5 years' time, there's going to be 3 guilt-stricken scientists, you know, writing in the conversation, going at COP26 in November in Glasgow. Not a single scientist thought that there was a carbon budget left. Do you get it? So it's always like 5 years out of date. Like the IPCC apparently said like 3 years ago that we'll hit 1.5 around mid-century, and now it's looking like 2030, give or take. Okay, so that's the first thing to understand, right? It's all out of date, it's a lot worse than you think, but how much worse is it? So again, you know, I could choose a whole bunch of peer-reviewed papers that have come out in the last year. So I'm just going to choose one of them just to get a feel for how absolutely beyond description horrendous the situation is. All right, so there's this paper called The Future of the Human Niche. So you can look it up on the internet. It's only about 10 pages or so, it's quite easy to read. And in there, they say at 2 degrees centigrade, you know, the amount that we're trying to stay under in the Paris Agreement. What that actually means in inland areas is 7 degrees, right? 7 degrees centigrade. So again, I talked to the guy, one of the guys who wrote this is one of the top leading scientists, this guy in the Netherlands, and he was walking his dog while he's talking to me, and I said, is that right? Is 2 degrees actually 7 degrees? And of course that's 7 degrees on a normal day, right? So I'm here in London, so that means it's going to be like, you know, 30 degrees on an average day and 45 degrees when it's really like hot. That's what it means. Okay. Anyway, he said, yeah, that's right. And then he said, we were so surprised. You know, because you read all these articles, don't you? We were so surprised, always so surprised. And then he said, where's the effect that it did another year or two's research? In other words, they went back and did it all again with all their computers. So the point here is that these are the top experts in the world. And that's what they're saying. Now, what does that actually mean, 2 degrees? So the great thing about this paper is they don't just stop there, they make a calculation on where people are going to be able to live. Okay, so this is human habitability, right? The future of the human niche. Where is it that it's possible to live? So it turns out that 2 degrees centigrade, which is coming along in 10, 15, 20 years, maybe a bit after, maybe a bit before, then there's going to be 1,000 million people living in areas which are uninhabitable, right? They're going to have to move. That's what it really means. So what does that mean, right? 1,000 million people, and they're not all going to sort of just get up and neatly move somewhere that no one really knows. It's going to be a complete shit show. That's what they're saying. As a social scientist, like, my responsibility is to say, well, it's not actually that complicated to know what it's going to look like because there's loads of historical examples, right? I mean, the most recent one is Syria. So in Syria, 5 million people were internally displaced and 500,000 people died. So that's like 10% people died. So when these 1,000 million people move, you can say 100 million of them are going to be dead, give or take. And we know what like social collapse looks like, because this is what it is. Social collapse looks like the Congo, right? So Congo is probably the best example of social collapse in the last, 40, 50 years since the Second World War. It's actually the biggest conflict in terms of slaughter of human beings. Like in the early 2000s, 5 million people were killed by warlordism and all the rest of it. And 2 million women were raped. So it's my responsibility to sort of lay that out, right? Because that's what the truth is, right? It's slaughter, starvation, rape, death for thousands of millions of people. At 3 degrees centigrade, they're saying it's going to be 2 billion, right? 2,000 million people. And that's before we factor in all the forest fires and, the deltas getting swamped with water and all the rest of it. All right. So I'm going to tell you the really bad news, which has to be at the center of our understanding of what we have to do at this point in history. Okay, so we've established 2 things. Number 1, what we're being told is a systematic lie. It's so much worse than we think. Number 2, so much worse than we think is beyond appalling. We're talking about global economic and social collapse.
Global warming is a pile of crap.
The problem with climate change is there's never been a day in the history of the world in which the climate has not changed.
The climate on Mars is changing, and Mars doesn't have any SUVs on it.
It's in the interests of the left to have destructive hurricanes, because then they can blame it on climate change.
The ice caps were going to melt. They were going to be gone by now, but now they're setting records, okay?
A hearing on Capitol Hill on global warming was canceled because of snow in Washington, D.C. You can't make this stuff up.
It's a snowball, and that's just from outside here. So it's very, very cold out.
I found it ironic the president was wearing a trench coat. It was so cold, and he's talking about global warming.
It's not global warming. It's God's judgment coming to this country.
Environmentalism has become a radical movement, something we call the Green Dragon.
Scientists from the pits of hell, how dare you take from Yahweh the sovereign right over the weather?
When I was 6 or something like that, I opened up a birthday present that I didn't like, and the person that gave me the gift was there. And I just crushed that person, and you think, well, that's kind of how we're treating God when he's given us these gifts of abundant and inexpensive fuel sources. Right. God's buried those treasures there because he loves to see us find them.
We were put on this earth as creatures of God to have dominion over the earth for our benefit, not for the earth's benefit.
One hurricane is the equivalent of 10,000 nuclear weapons. So every year we've got like 2 million nuclear weapons going off, and the planet still seems to be in pretty good shape. So what is it we think we're going to do to damage the planet?
And we have more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere now, which is actually greening the planet.
It's greening the planet.
It's greening the planet.
That's good.
Yes, it is.
If you believe that mankind is causing climate change, you're deceived by Satan.
This is the real solution to climate change. Babies.
From Hollywood, it's Jimmy Kimmel Live, Climate Night, tonight. Julianne Moore, climate scientist Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, in music from My Morning Jacket. And now, Jimmy Kimmel!
I'm Jimmy. I'm the host of the show. Thanks for coming. Thanks for watching. Thanks for joining us on a special night. We have a special show for you tonight. Tonight, we're teaming up with all the other late-night shows to talk about climate change and the coming apocalypse that will follow if we continue to do nothing about it. It's going to be fun. It's going to be a really fun night. And don't even think about switching to another show. We're all focused on this topic tonight. You can't escape. It's basically an intervention. Our future is in jeopardy. You know that show Jeopardy? That's all screwed up? This is even worse than that. The latest report from the IPCC, which is the world's leading authority on climate change, just came out. Here's a quick summary of what they found.
Experts are calling the world's climate change threat a code red for humanity.
Code red for humanity.
Code red for humanity.
Code red for humanity.
A code red for humanity.
Code red
for humanity.
Yeah. Code Red is not good. Code Red, not even as a flavor of Mountain Dew, is Code Red good. And as we saw this summer, this is not a maybe sometime in the future problem. This is happening now. It's 100 degrees in the valley here today. It seems like we get hit with fallout from the climate crisis every day here in California. Wildfires, floods, landslides, which are all amazing things to hear Stevie Nicks sing about, not something you want to experience in life. And if death and destruction, famine, pestilence, water shortages on a global scale, if that isn't scary enough, think about this. Scientists say climate change could severely impact the world supply of beer.
No!
See, that's right. You like coffee? Half the world's coffee beans could be wiped out, so enjoy your morning cup of steam. You like chocolate? Same thing. Imagine a world where you get a carrot cake for your birthday. It's a nightmare. Climate change could even lead to massive shortages of rosé. I don't actually know if that's true. I just want to see if the white women were listening. Yeah? Okay. If you are a person living on this planet, your future is in peril. That's a scientific fact. It's like, you know, in your early 20s, you drink all week and you eat a pizza in the middle of the night, 3 hours of sleep, and show up to work on Monday morning whistling. You do that in your 50s, you wake up on the toilet dead. This is like that. And yes, there are other issues that are all very important. The pandemic, systemic racism, income inequality, immigration, gun violence. But here's the thing, if we don't address climate change, none of those issues will matter at all. The car is going off a cliff and we're fiddling with the radio. We are way past climate denial. Now, for some of us, it's already too late for some of it. The IPCC says, I can't even say their name. That's how serious this is. No, the IPCC says only transformational action right now will help us avert the worst of it. But that'll be tough because for some baffling reason, climate change has become a partisan issue. Even though some prominent Republicans, like the late John McCain, warned us about it many years ago.
The fact is that the overwhelming body of scientific opinion in America and the world believes that human activity is causing climate change in the world. And that is an irrefutable fact.
So that clip's from 2003. We're still arguing about this, whether it's factual or not. Some groups are coming around. Some evangelical groups are taking it seriously. Some corporations are taking it seriously, but not seriously enough. We're still acting like this is something we won't have to worry about for 20 years. If we wait 20 years, we're screwed. You think life is hard now? Wait till we don't have enough water. I don't know, how could anyone be opposed to trying to fix this? Even if you run an oil company, you and your children and their children are going to have to live on the world. There's no planet B. And yet some people, many of whom you saw ranting and raving at the beginning of the show, deny a problem even exists. But at least they have an excuse. Some of them, most of them are crazy. It's the smart ones who are evil and reckless. You know the story about the boy who cried wolf? These are the boys who cry no wolf. Nothing to worry about. No wolf at all. Your soft pink bellies have nothing to fear. And maybe the craziest group of all are these jackholes who admit that climate change is our own fault, but say we can't afford to stop it. Like Rick Scott, the senator from Florida, a state that is basically America's illegal fireworks stand. Rick Scott is worried that fighting climate change will destroy jobs, which even if that was true, which it isn't, you know what else will destroy jobs? Armageddon will destroy a lot of jobs. Our jobs are going to be hunting for canned food like Viggo Mortensen in The Road if we don't fix this. And by the way, why is anyone listening to those guys? This is the same group who told you gay marriage was going to destroy the fabric of society and Obamacare would kill your grandmother with the death panels and COVID would wash away. They're O for everything. You would think these politicians who call themselves conservatives might want to conserve. I mean, even on the off chance that Al Gore and every reputable climate scientist is right about global warming, bringing fires and floods and all this horrible stuff.
Okay, now the jet streams are slowing down and becoming wavier and becoming stuck in place. And when I say wavier, I mean in the north-south direction. And they're doing this because the Arctic is undergoing much faster warming than the rest of the planet. And because they're moving slower, what it means, well, first of all, under these waves of the jet stream, you might have about 6 or 7 waves traversing the circumference of the Earth at high latitude.
That's according to police on Wednesday.
The jet stream, and when the waves form a crest, you know, it can go very, very far north, and in fact even go up to the North Pole, and the trough of the wave can extend very, very far south and even reach the equator, and actually even connect with jet streams in the southern hemisphere and cross the equator. The important thing to know is that under the ridges, you have things like the heat dome, which we've been experiencing in lots of, you know, mostly the western parts of North America. And in the troughs of these jet streams, you get weather patterns. You get lots of unsettled weather, lots of storms, lots of rain. And what we're seeing now, over the last number of years, we've had more and more extreme weather events around the planet because the jet streams have become wavier and wavier. So, you know, even a good example of a really striking event was in 2010. The trough of the jet stream covered most of Pakistan, and the ridge of the jet stream, that same jet stream, covered over Moscow and lots of Russia. So in the trough where Pakistan was, it rained just about every day, and it was persistent. This pattern held fast in place for, you know, for many, many weeks, you know, from July to through late June, part of July. So in Pakistan, it rained almost every day in the trough, very unsettled weather, and 3/4 of the country experienced severe flooding. In the crest of the jet stream over Russia, it was extremely warm heat dome, heat waves. Russia lost about 40% of their grain crop, and they weren't able to export grain that year. There were grain shortages, and we had the Arab Spring being triggered at that same period of time. More recently, what's been happening, say, in the last few months, is that we've had this tremendous ridge of the jet stream over Western North America, and we've had the heat dome, so-called heat dome, and heat waves, and drying, and failure of crops, and drying out of forests and things. Even some storms where lightning was produced but no rain, and triggering all of these wildfires. You know, and with the ground so parched, and having had a fairly decent rainfall leading up to this heat dome and heat wave, there was lots of vegetation on the ground, which then dried out and became fuel, if you like, rocket fuel for these wildfires. So that's the crest of the wave of the jet stream. Well, guess where the trough is being from that exact same wave that circumvents the Earth? The trough is being over Europe. In fact, the jet stream split. So part of it was going north of Europe, part of it was going south, but so it created this, what's called a cutoff low. It's not just, you know, which is, you know, similar to just what's happening in the trough of the jet stream. And we had torrential rains in Europe. We had tremendous amounts of rainfall, and of course that rain, you know, in rugged, hilly part terrain in Europe, that water had nowhere to go but into the small river and creek basins, you know, which normally had decent flow rates, and suddenly, you know, they're inundated with water, and that water just poured through many small towns along the route, and completely, you know, you've seen the pictures of the cars floating and houses being swept away. Okay, so these, because of the waviness and slowing down of the jet streams, we're experiencing huge numbers of extreme weather events. Okay, the frequency of these extremes has gone up. No longer can we talk about a 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 year event, because, you know, it's liable to happen 1 year and happen in a few years. The severity of these Extreme weather events has also increased, whether it be the severity of a drought from a heat wave or the severity of the rainfall.
Existing political institutions move slowly, even when leaders are well-intentioned. International cooperation has always been difficult. It's made more difficult by all the misinformation and propaganda that can flood out through social media these days. Business leaders, let's face it, are typically rewarded for boosting short-term profits, not addressing major social issues. Getting people to work together on a global scale takes time. And right now, that's time we don't have. So if we're honest with ourselves, yes, this is going to be really hard. The thing we have going for us is that humanity has done hard things before. I believe we can do hard things again. Yes, the process will be messy. I guarantee you, every victory will be incomplete. We will face more setbacks. Sometimes we will be forced to settle for imperfect compromises, because even if they don't achieve everything we want, at least they advance the cause. At least they move the ball down the field. But if we work hard enough for long enough, those partial victories add up. If we push hard enough, stay focused enough, and are smart about it, those victories accelerate and they build momentum. If we listen to those who are resistant and we take their concerns seriously and we work with them and we organize and we mobilize and we get our hands dirty in the difficulties of changing political dynamics in our countries,